what happens when one of Britain's most beloved actors loses his cool on live television. In just 40 seconds, Colin Firth went from composed gentleman to storming off the Good Morning Britain set after a heated clash with Kate Garraway that left the entire studio in shocked silence. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you subscribe to this channel for daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals and the most dramatic moments caught on camera. Last night's episode of Good Morning Britain started like any other morning broadcast. Colin Firth arrived at the studio to discuss his latest film project, settling into the bright orange sofa across from Kate Garraway and her co-host. The lighting was perfect, the cameras were rolling, and everything seemed set for a pleasant conversation about cinema and craft. The makeup team had just finished touching up Colin's face, and he sat there looking relaxed, even cheerful, sipping water from a glass provided by a production assistant. The show's theme music played, the cameras came to life, and Kate launched into her introduction with practiced ease. She welcomed viewers, ran through the morning's headlines, and then turned her attention to her guest with that familiar broadcaster smile that had made her a household name across Britain. "Colin, it's absolutely wonderful to have you here this morning," Kate began, her voice warm and welcoming. "Your new film has been getting quite a bit of attention, and we're excited to talk about it. But before we get to that, I have to ask about something that's been making waves on social media over the past few weeks." Colin's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of caution crossing his face. He set down his water glass carefully on the small table beside the sofa. "What might that be, Kate?" "Well," Kate continued, leaning forward with that journalist instinct kicking in, her eyes brightening with the scent of a story. "There's been quite a lot of discussion about your comments last month regarding the film industry's treatment of older actresses. Some people are saying you were being hypocritical given your own career choices. I'm sure you've seen some of the responses online." Colin's jaw tightened visibly, but he maintained his composure, though his voice took on a slightly cooler tone. "I'm not sure I follow your line of questioning. I was simply pointing out an obvious disparity that exists in how the industry values performers as they age. It's a conversation that's long overdue." "Right, absolutely. And it's an important conversation," Kate agreed, nodding seriously. "But Colin, and this is where some of the criticism comes in, critics have pointed out that in your last 3 films, your romantic co-stars were all women at least 15 years younger than you. Some people are asking, isn't that participating in the very system you're criticizing? How do you square that circle?" The question hung in the air. You could see Colin processing it, his fingers drumming once on his knee before he caught himself. "Kate, I think you're conflating 2 different issues here. I don't choose my co-stars. That's not how filmmaking works. Directors cast based on the story they're telling, the chemistry they see in auditions, and 100 other factors that have nothing to do with me. But you do choose which scripts to accept, don't you?" Kate wasn't letting go, her tone becoming sharper, more pointed. "You have that power. You're not some unknown actor who has to take every role offered. You're Colin Firth. You can afford to be selective. Many actors do turn down roles when they don't align with their values." Colin shifted in his seat, and the movement was caught by every camera in the studio. His polite smile was becoming more fixed, more strained. "Kate, I think you're oversimplifying a complex issue to create controversy where there isn't any. The point I was making in my original comments was about systemic problems in how the industry functions, not about individual casting decisions in specific films." Kate's co-host sensed the rising tension and tried to jump in, his voice upbeat and placating. "Perhaps we should talk about the new film itself. Colin, the reviews have been absolutely—" "No, I want to finish this," Colin interrupted, and the sharpness in his voice made everyone in the studio sit up a little straighter. His famous calm demeanor was starting to crack, revealing something harder underneath. "Kate, are you genuinely interested in discussing the systemic problems in the film industry, or are you just trying to create a gotcha moment for your ratings?" Because it's starting to feel very much like the latter. The studio audience gasped audibly. You could hear the sharp intake of breath from dozens of people simultaneously. Kate's smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of genuine surprise that quickly morphed into indignation. Her posture stiffened. "I'm sorry, Colin, but that's completely unfair and frankly quite insulting. I'm asking legitimate questions that many people want answered. Questions that, frankly, need to be asked." Legitimate questions? Colin's voice rose slightly, his accent becoming more pronounced as his emotions heightened. "You're twisting my words and my intentions to make me look like a hypocrite on live television. That's not journalism, Kate. That's something else entirely." "I'm not twisting anything," Kate shot back, her own professional mask starting to slip. Her cheeks had flushed pink, and her hands gestured emphatically as she spoke. "I'm asking you to explain the disconnect between what you say publicly and the choices reflected in your filmography." "That's a fair question, Colin. You have to admit there's at least an appearance of contradiction there." Colin leaned forward, his eyes flashing with genuine anger now. "The disconnect, Kate, is between actual advocacy for change and journalists who reduce complex discussions to tabloid-level attacks disguised as hard-hitting interviews. What you're doing right now isn't brave journalism. It's lazy." The word lazy seemed to physically hit Kate. Her mouth opened slightly in shock. The co-host's eyes went wide, and he tried again to intervene, his voice higher now, more urgent. "Let's all take a breath here, shall we? This is getting a bit heated." "I'm perfectly calm," Colin said, though his clenched fists resting on his knees suggested otherwise. The camera zoomed in slightly, capturing the white of his knuckles. "What I'm not is interested in being ambushed on morning television by someone I thought was a serious journalist." Kate's voice sharpened like a blade. She sat up even straighter, her jaw set. "Ambushed? Colin, these are questions any decent journalist would ask. If you're going to make public statements about industry practices, you have to expect scrutiny about your own role in those practices. That's how it works. You don't get to make pronouncements and then claim immunity from examination." "Scrutiny is fine," Colin replied, his voice tight. "I welcome genuine scrutiny. This is character assassination. There's a difference, and I suspect you know that." "That's absurd," Kate replied, her face now fully flushed. "You're being overly sensitive to fairly basic questioning. I haven't attacked your character at all. I've simply asked you to reconcile your public statements with your professional choices." Those words hung in the air like a lit fuse, and you could almost see the moment they detonated in Colin's mind. His entire body language changed. He sat up straighter, his shoulders squared, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone that somehow carried more menace than if he'd shouted, "Overly sensitive? Is that your professional assessment, Kate? I'm saying you're reacting quite strongly to what is, frankly, fair criticism," Kate clarified. But there was steel in her voice. Now, she wasn't backing down, and the set crackled with the tension between them. "If you can't handle being questioned about apparent contradictions in your positions, perhaps you shouldn't take such public stances." "Fair criticism," Colin repeated slowly, his accent clipping each word with precision. "Right. Tell me, Kate, when you interview female celebrities, do you interrogate their every career choice looking for ammunition? Do you cross-examine them about every role they've taken? Or is this special treatment reserved for men who dare to speak up about inequality? Because I'm genuinely curious about your methodology here." The audience murmured loudly now. Someone gasped. Kate's eyes widened and her voice rose. "Now wait just a minute. That is completely— No, you wait." Colin cut her off, and the whole studio seemed to hold its breath. "I came here in good faith to discuss my work, to talk about a film I'm proud of, and instead you've spent the last several minutes trying to paint me as some kind of fraud, as if advocating for change while working in an imperfect system somehow invalidates the advocacy itself." Kate tried to regain control of the interview, her hands raised slightly, as if trying to physically push back against Colin's words. Colin, I think you're fundamentally misunderstanding the nature of— I understand perfectly well, Colin interrupted again, his voice rising steadily. This is tabloid journalism with a veneer of respectability. You're not interested in real conversation. You're not interested in discussing solutions or having a meaningful dialogue about these issues. You're interested in viral clips and controversial headlines that will trend on Twitter. Kate's face had gone from flushed to pale, the color draining as her own anger mounted. That is completely out of line, and you know it. This is Good Morning Britain, not some tabloid show. We ask tough questions of everyone who sits on this sofa. Everyone. Politicians, celebrities, activists. We don't give anyone a free pass. Tough questions? Colin's laugh was bitter and harsh. Is that what you call this? Reducing a nuanced discussion about systemic inequality in the entertainment industry to cheap gotcha accusations? That's not tough questioning, Kate. That's reductive nonsense. The co-host made another desperate attempt to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation. He literally held up both hands between them as if he could physically separate their conflict. Perhaps we've gotten off track here. Colin, if we could just take a step back and maybe approach this from a different angle. Colin leaned forward, his eyes flashing. The disconnect, Kate, is between actual advocacy for change and journalists who reduce complex discussions to tabloid-level attacks disguised as hard-hitting interviews. The atmosphere had turned electric. Kate's co-host tried again to intervene. Let's all take a breath here. I'm perfectly calm, Colin said, though his clenched fists suggested otherwise. What I'm not is interested in being ambushed. Kate's voice sharpened. Ambushed? Colin, these are questions any decent journalist would ask. If you're going to make public statements about industry practices, you have to expect scrutiny about your own role in those practices. Scrutiny is fine. This is character assassination. That's absurd, Kate replied, her face flushing. You're being overly sensitive. Those words hung in the air like a lit fuse. Colin's entire body language changed. He sat up straighter, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone. Overly sensitive? Is that your professional assessment? I'm saying you're reacting quite strongly to fair criticism, Kate clarified, but there was steel in her voice now. Fair criticism, Colin repeated, his accent clipping each word. Right. Tell me, Kate, when you interview female celebrities, do you interrogate their every career choice, looking for ammunition? Or is this special treatment reserved for men who dare to speak up about inequality? The audience murmured. Kate's eyes widened. Now wait just a minute. No, you wait. Colin cut her off, and the whole studio seemed to hold its breath. I came here in good faith to discuss my work, and instead you've spent the last several minutes trying to paint me as some kind of fraud. Kate tried to regain control. Colin, I think you're misunderstanding the nature of— I understand perfectly well, Colin interrupted again, his voice rising. This is tabloid journalism, with a veneer of respectability. You're not interested in real conversation. You're interested in viral clips and controversial headlines. Kate's face had gone from flushed to pale, the color draining as her own anger mounted. Her hands were clenched at her sides. That is completely out of line, and you know it. This is Good Morning Britain, not some tabloid show. We ask tough questions of everyone who sits on this sofa. Everyone. Politicians, celebrities, activists, business people. We don't give anyone a free pass, and we certainly don't back down when someone gets uncomfortable with scrutiny. Tough questions? Colin's laugh was bitter and harsh, almost cruel. Is that what you call this? Reducing a nuanced discussion about systemic inequality in the entertainment industry to cheap gotcha accusations? That's not tough questioning, Kate. That's reductive nonsense designed to generate outrage. The co-host made another desperate attempt to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation. He literally held up both hands between them as if he could physically separate their conflict. Perhaps we've gotten off track here. Colin, if we could just take a step back and maybe approach this from a different angle. Talk about the actual film. No, Colin said firmly, his patience finally and completely exhausted. His voice was flat, final, brooking no argument. We can't, because Kate has made it abundantly clear this isn't an interview. It's a trap. It was a trap from the moment I sat down, wasn't it? You had this line of questioning planned before I even walked into the studio. You never had any intention of discussing my work. A trap? Kate's voice rose sharply, incredulously, her composure completely gone now. For God's sake, Colin, you're being absolutely ridiculous. I asked you legitimate questions about legitimate contradictions in your public positions, and you've responded by attacking my integrity as a journalist, calling my work lazy and tabloid level. Who's really being unfair here? Who's really out of line? Your integrity? Colin stood up abruptly, the movement so sudden and violent, it startled everyone in the studio. Several audience members actually jumped in their seats. The microphone pack was still clipped to his jacket, the wire trailing behind him awkwardly. You don't get to lecture me about integrity when you've spent this entire segment trying to create conflict out of thin air. You had no interest in my film. You had no interest in a real discussion about the issues I raised. You wanted a fight. And congratulations, Kate, you're getting one. Kate stood as well, matching his movement instantly, refusing to let him have the physical high ground or appear to dominate the exchange. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I created nothing. Absolutely nothing. You came on this show having made public statements about industry sexism and ageism, and I asked you to explain them in the context of your own career choices. That's literally my job. That's what I'm paid to do. That's what journalism is. Your job is to inform viewers, not to manufacture controversy for clicks and ratings. Colin shot back, his voice loud enough now that it echoed in the studio. Someone in the audience coughed nervously. But I suppose actual journalism doesn't get as many social media shares as a good celebrity meltdown, does it? That's what you wanted, isn't it? That's the whole bloody point of this ambush? The studio had gone deadly quiet, except for the hum of cameras and equipment. Even the production staff behind the scenes had stopped moving. Kate's voice was ice cold, each word carefully enunciated. If you're accusing me of unprofessional conduct, Colin, you should be very careful about what you say next. We have standards on this program. We have lawyers. We have legal teams. Be very, very careful. Standards, Colin repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm and bitter contempt. Well, your standards and mine clearly differ significantly, fundamentally even, in ways that apparently can't be bridged. Kate's hands were trembling now, visibly shaking, whether from anger or shock or pure adrenaline, it was impossible to tell. Her voice cracked slightly. Colin, I think perhaps you should consider, just for a moment, that maybe, just maybe, the problem here isn't me asking questions. Maybe it's you, being completely unable to handle even the mildest criticism without flying off the handle like a petulant child. That was the final straw, the absolute breaking point. The words seemed to hit Colin like a physical blow. His face went from red to almost purple. He reached down and unclipped his microphone with shaking hands, the sound of the clip releasing painfully, awkwardly loud in the dead silent studio. Criticism I can handle. I've been in this business for decades. I've dealt with harsh reviews, failed projects, public scrutiny. I've heard it all. Ambush journalism disguised as morning chat, personal attacks disguised as hard-hitting questions. That I won't tolerate. I absolutely won't sit here and be your punching bag for ratings. Colin, please, the co-host tried one more time, desperation clear in his voice. He was standing up as well now, his hands outstretched placatingly, trying to physically position himself between them. Let's just take a moment here, have some water. Take a breath, and maybe we can reset this entire conversation and start fresh with the film discussion like we originally planned. No, Colin said flatly, firmly. with absolute finality. There was no room for negotiation in his voice. He dropped the microphone on the sofa cushion where he'd been sitting, and it landed with a soft thump. "I'm done here. I'm finished. This interview is over." Kate found her voice again, and there was something almost desperate in it now, a realization that this was spiraling beyond her control. "Colin, if you walk off this set right now, on live television, you're only proving that you can't handle legitimate scrutiny. You're proving my point. You're showing everyone watching that you can't defend your positions when challenged. Don't you see that?" Colin turned to face her fully, squaring his shoulders, and his expression was a complex mixture of anger, disappointment, disgust, and something that looked almost like pity. "What I can't handle, Kate, is watching someone I used to respect as a journalist, someone whose work I've admired for years, stoop to this level. I've watched your work. I've seen your interviews with politicians, with world leaders. I thought Good Morning Britain was better than tabloid gotcha journalism. I genuinely thought you were better than this. Clearly, I was very much mistaken about that. We are better than this," Kate insisted, and now her voice was shaking noticeably. She took a step toward him, her hand raised as if to physically stop him. "We are exactly what journalism should be in this day and age. We ask real questions of real people about real issues that matter. We don't give celebrities a platform to promote themselves without challenging their contradictions. If you're not prepared to answer difficult questions, perhaps you shouldn't make inflammatory public statements in the first place." "Inflammatory?" Colin's voice rose again, his face reddening further, the veins in quote, his neck standing out. "I advocated for fair treatment of women in the film industry. I pointed out that older actresses are consistently passed over for roles, while older actors like me continue working into their 70s and 80s playing romantic leads. How in God's name is that inflammatory? It's observable fact. It's statistical reality. It's not the advocacy that's the problem. And you know it," Kate shot back, her finger pointing at him now accusatorily. "It's the hypocrisy. It's standing on a soapbox about ageism and sexism while you're playing romantic leads opposite women young enough to be your daughters. Can't you see how that looks? Can't you see why people might question your sincerity?" Colin's face went red. "There is no bloody hypocrisy. I'm an actor, not a casting director. I don't control who I work with. But I can use my platform to advocate for change. That's what I was trying to do. But instead of having a meaningful conversation about it, you decided to turn this into a witch hunt." "A witch hunt?" Kate's voice was incredulous. "You're comparing being asked to explain your choices to a witch hunt? Do you hear yourself?" "What I hear," Colin said coldly, "is someone more interested in creating drama than in actually discussing the issue. What I hear is someone who would rather take cheap shots than engage in substantive dialogue." Kate's eyes flashed. "Cheap shots? I asked you direct questions based on publicly available information. If you consider that a cheap shot, then maybe you need to think more carefully before you speak publicly about sensitive issues. Maybe you need to think more carefully about what kind of journalist you want to be," Colin retorted. The silence that followed was deafening. Kate's face had gone through several shades of color. "I think we need to take a commercial break," she finally said, her voice tight. "Don't bother on my account," Colin said. He started walking toward the edge of the set. "I won't be here when you come back." "Colin, please," the co-host called out. "Let's all just calm down," and "I am calm," Colin said without turning around. "I'm also leaving. This has been a waste of everyone's time," Kate called after him, her professional composure crumbling. "Colin Firth, if you walk off this set without apologizing for your behavior, you're going to regret it." Colin stopped and turned back one final time. His voice was quiet but carried across the entire studio. "The only thing I regret, Kate, is agreeing to come on this show in the first place. I thought I was going to have a conversation with a respected journalist. Instead, I got ambushed by someone chasing headlines." "Ambushed," Kate repeated, her voice shaking with anger. "You keep using that word. What you're calling an ambush, most people would call accountability." "Call it whatever helps you sleep at night," Colin said. Then he turned and walked off the set, leaving Kate standing there, speechless. As the studio erupted in chaos, the cameras kept rolling as Colin disappeared through the studio doors, not looking back. Kate stood frozen for a moment, her face a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been regret. Her co-host tried to fill the silence, stammering something about unexpected developments and commercial breaks, but it was too late. Colin Firth had walked off Good Morning Britain, and the entire confrontation had been captured on live television. The 40-second clash had escalated into a full-blown media event, all unfolding before millions of viewers who had tuned in, expecting a pleasant morning chat about movies, and instead witnessed one of the most dramatic exits in the show's history. As Colin pushed through the studio doors and disappeared from view, the set behind him remained in chaos. Kate stood at the sofa, her hands on her hips, clearly shaken by what had just transpired. The co-host continued attempting to maintain some semblance of control, but the damage was done. The comfortable morning chat show had transformed into a battleground, and Britain's gentlemanly actor had chosen to surrender the field rather than continue the fight. The orange sofa where he had been sitting moments before was empty except for his discarded microphone, a silent testimony to the confrontation that had just torn apart what should have been a straightforward interview. In those final moments before the commercial break finally came, viewers could see Kate trying to compose herself, smoothing down her dress and pushing her hair back from her face. Her co-host put a hand on her shoulder, speaking quietly, but Kate shook her head, clearly still processing what had just happened. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, many with their phones out, already uploading clips of the confrontation to social media. Within minutes, the hashtag would be trending. Within hours, the clips would have millions of views. But in that moment, in the immediate aftermath, there was only the heavy silence of a morning show that had gone completely off the rails, and an empty seat where one of Britain's most beloved actors had been sitting just minutes before.